Right, so if you thought the abuse of Diane Abbott by her own party, the Labour Party, never mind the abuse the mainstream media are fixated upon aimed at her from the Tories, their awful donor, which was bad enough, Keir Starmer has just sunk to an all-time absolute low concerning his and his party's treatment of her, continuing to ignore her suspension, talking about her instead of to her, but now they're weaponising the abuse she received from Tory donor Frank Hester to raise money for their party. They won't admit her back to the parliamentary party. Labour itself is complicit in much of the abuse Abbott has faced over the last several years. But despite that, this amoral, racist party is still prepared to use her name to appeal to you for donations to them. But something even worse than that is now being rumoured, and if true, should bring the entire Labour Party anti-racist performative nonsense that all of this has been crashing down around Keir Starmer's ears. Right, so, sorry Diane, we won't talk to you. We'll continue to pretend you don't exist. We're going to keep you suspended because really, we just want to deselect you and be rid of you. Oh, but we're still going to trade on your good name and reputation and cash in on the abuse you have suffered for our ends, because we, the Labour Party, see this as an opportunity to appeal for funds. Anyone giving money to Labour because the Tories abused Diane Abbott are ignorant of the fact that Labour have been, and still are, abusing Diane Abbott more than the Tories ever have. She was suspended for sending the wrong copy of a letter she'd written to a newspaper, which made claims she didn't mean. She apologised and retracted it within hours, if not minutes, and still she got suspended. A year later nearly, she remained suspended, her case not having been dealt with. Her suspension with every passing day becoming more and more obviously a means to ensure she cannot stand again for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, an incredibly safe Labour seat, because they have an incredibly good local Labour MP in Diane Abbott. Despite everything that has happened concerning Frank Hester, the Tories' biggest ever donor, which I covered in another video, there's been no communication between anyone on the shadow cabinet or Starmer himself and Diane Abbott. She is still a Labour member, even if she can't sit as one right now, and she's been treated like dirt. If we'd been on the receiving end of abuse, we'd hope our colleagues would be there for us. But she's been left alone. Not even a message from Starmer, her party leader, who she called out on a breakfast news channel in a statement read out, calling on him to offer some support to her. There has been none. He has still not publicly offered her any support. Apparently he spoke to her briefly after PMQs, but that's been it. And indeed such was the case at PMQs yesterday, when once more the abuse of Diane Abbott was on show. Despite being a major topic of debate that day, despite her safety, her abuse, the racism she had received being discussed, Lindsay Hoyle once again fails in the most basic way, as Abbott herself stood no fewer than 46 times during PMQs to ask a question based on what she herself had experienced. Everyone else was asking questions relating to her, were picked to ask questions relating to her. Yet she herself was not picked. The very victim of the abuse was literally gagged, and the excuse for this that Hoyle made afterwards was as bad as his claims about terrorist attacks in light of breaking precedent on the last SNP Opposition Day debate on a ceasefire in Gaza. A spokesperson for Sir Lindsay Hoyle has defended the Speaker's decision not to call Diane Abbott at PMQs. The spokesperson said, during Prime Minister's questions, the Speaker must select MPs from either side of the House on an alternating basis for fairness. This takes place within a limited time frame, with the Chair prioritising members who are already listed on the order paper. This week, as is often the case, there was not enough time to call all members who wanted to ask a question. For one, when Abbott herself is the object of so many of the questions, it would just be courtesy and common decency and respectful for her to be asked to speak on her own behalf on an issue pertaining to herself. And for two, who decides the limited time frame? Inverted commas. The damn Speaker does. It's Hoyle's choice when he ends PMQs. He has a habit of ending it as close to 12:30 as possible, but his predecessor, John Bercow, he regularly allowed PMQs to overrun. There's no excusing that weakling of a Speaker to have not called Diane Abbott. 46 times she stood to get his attention. She was wearing bright red. And she was ignored each and every time, despite so many questions being asked about her. He cannot have failed to have noticed her. In fact, when a politician in witness to or involved in an incident, it is parliamentary convention, in fact, to call them. So the fact Hoyle failed to can only ever be seen as intentional. Another incident like this happened back in 1972, when the then Speaker Selwyn Lloyd failed to call Bloody Sunday Massacre witness and Mid-Ulster MP Bernadette Devlin to speak, just as Diane Abbott was denied. In Devlin's case, this allowed the then Tory Home Secretary Reginald Maudling to lie about the incident, claiming the parachute regiment shot in self-defence, which led to Devlin smacking him across the face the next day and telling the press that she wished she got him in the throat instead. Now, I dare say Diane Abbott won't resort to violence against Lindsay Hoyle, but you can imagine she might have thought about it. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn spoke to her afterwards. He had some common decency and common courtesy, and he had plenty to say about Hoyle over this too.
I cannot fathom why the Speaker of the House of Commons did not allow Diane Abbott to use her own voice on a matter which is intrinsically linked to her as a person. It was an absurd decision. Every single member of Parliament in the chamber knew that Diane Abbott, she was sitting up the back behind me, we all knew that she was bobbing, that she was ready to ask a question, that she had her notes with her. We were all just waiting for it to happen. And then the Speaker decided that she's not going to have a voice on this issue. And if I may, I think he's lost control of the chamber. Obviously, the disagreement between myself and Lindsay is well known to everyone, but this was a stage further today.
Are you suggesting you think he was cowed in some way, that he thought it would be too embarrassing for the government if she spoke?
You know what? I think it's beyond even me to offer some sort of commentary as to the decision making that the Speaker gave today, because it's so outrageously bad.
I noticed you scooting up the steps at the end of the session to talk to Diane. What did she say to you, and what did you say to her?
I won't necessarily go into specifics because it was very fleeting, but I just wanted to express to her my shock that she hadn't been taken. I expected her to be able to use her voice today. Everyone knew that she was ready to do that, and it's just very disappointing, but maybe typical of Westminster that Diane Abbott wasn't able to express her own views on a matter that is obviously so pertinent to her as an individual. As you perfectly fairly raised yourself, you've had quite a feud with the Speaker over the way he treated a particular vote. Do you now think he has to go? Yeah, I mean, of course he does. He broke precedent when it was to do with us. He changed the rules on following a private discussion he'd had with Keir Starmer. I've got very strong views as to what that discussion would have been about, but we'll never obviously know. He cowed down to the Labour leader, but today was just a step too far. You've got myself and others talking about Diane Abbott using the time that we have to raise our concerns about the language that's been used, the threatening language towards one of our parliamentary colleagues, whether they're in our own political parties or not. She should have been afforded that right as well. It's unforgivable that didn't happen.
I would have loved to have seen Diane Abbott herself invited onto LBC to speak to Andrew Marr about this instead of Stephen Flynn. Perhaps she was. Frankly, all of the media seem to be ignoring Diane Abbott herself as much as Parliament seems to. But Flynn was not wrong in anything he said there, and fair play to him to extend his shock to a member of another party in light of everything. But he did make mention of Hoyle perhaps having been cowed into not selecting Diane Abbott. And in light of the fear Hoyle evidently has of Keir Starmer, the details of that conversation between the two of them not likely to ever come out, not now the deputy speakers have closed ranks and blocked Starmer's referral to the Privileges and Standards Committee to be questioned over allegations of such threats that he might have made to Hoyle. Would it really be beyond the scope of reality to surmise that Starmer might have done it again? Gone and seen Lindsay Hoyle again, told Hoyle to not pick her, just in case she might bring up her own abuse at the hands of the Labour Party? Well, who'd bet against that right now? Hoyle is, to all outward appearances, Starmer's bitch right now. A speaker held in the thrall of one party leader is as undemocratic as you get, and a clear show that Hoyle, as Flynn rightly said, has been rendered powerless. Diane Abbott has been suspended spuriously from the Labour Party, ostracised, and the litany of abuse against her as detailed in both the Labour Leaks reports and the Ford report into Labour Party abuse and racism spells it all out in black and white. Starmer and co have still not said so much of a word to her, despite plenty about her. But that abuse, it gets worse now, because not only is it ongoing, but Labour have actually weaponised it and are also allegedly resorting to blackmail, which, if true, is starting to become a bit of a Well, I say, a little bit of a pattern seems to be forming here around Keir Starmer, especially after all of those allegations regarding Lindsay Hoyle. You see, Labour members have been getting emails about the Tory racism towards Diane Abbott, though conveniently not mentioning her by name, reading, "Dear such and such, this is disgraceful. The Tory party's biggest donor, Frank Hester, has been exposed for making racist comments. You can find out what he is alleged to have said yourself. It's all over the news. We're fuming. £10 million in their election fund from this man, and they're not giving it back. A huge amount of money, adding to their already huge financial advantage. They're so desperate to cling on to power that they'll happily ignore the racism, cover their ears, and spend every penny. We need to cancel it out. Unlike the Tories, our campaigns rely on small donations from thousands of working people who all want a better future for Britain and know the only way that can happen is with a Labour government. That's why we're asking you today if you can chip in towards our general election campaign fund. The Tories won't return the tainted £10 million, and it makes it all the more difficult for us to beat the Tories in the next general election. Their pockets are deep, but if you donate today, you can help us make real strides to close the huge funding gap between us and the Tories. I would sooner scoop my own eyes out with a melon borer than hand you a penny after that. They didn't even mention Diane Abbott by name in that. They talk of Tory racism as if theirs hasn't been going on much longer regarding Abbott, and that her suspension is the icing on the cake of that, given what she did was an honest error and was seized upon with apparent gleeful opportunism. They aren't even honest about their donations, because those thousands of small donations that Corbyn brought in have disappeared since Starmer took over. He blew the surplus millions Corbyn had left the party with, and now they are beholden once again to the same sort of donors the Tories are. And when you're bought and paid for by them, you can't represent us. So we have abuse from the Tories, more abuse arguably, certainly for far longer from our own party, Labour, who are now weaponising the issue to fundraise. Sickos. So how can things possibly get worse? Well, how about this Blackmail story then? It is being rumoured at time of writing, not firmed up, but it's being rumoured that Labour have offered to return the whip to Diane Abbott, despite claiming all this time that an investigation, which blatantly isn't happening, is ongoing. How can you magically just give her back the whip then? Either she's innocent and should have the whip back, in which case, or not, but without any decision having been made, we don't know which. So this sudden dangling of a carrot, the whip being handed back, it does very much look like her suspension has indeed been weaponised. But if this is blackmail, what do they want in return then? Labour are allegedly willing to give Diane Abbott back the whip now, or very soon, if she promises to stand down in Parliament and doesn't run at the next general election expected this year. There are apparently some 4 candidates who would really like her seat, and why wouldn't they when it is as safe a seat as Diane Abbott's is? She's got a majority of over 58%. This news has come courtesy of the Labour right's favourite hack to leak to, Lee Harpin. It's the sort of thing he would readily publish, though frankly I don't see the incentive for Abbott to agree to this. What it does make beyond doubt, though, is that her suspension, as she has commented on previously, very much is being strung out precisely to deselect her. And that is the end game they want. She can have the whip back now if she pledges to stand down at the next general election, or they will just remain withholding it from her so that she cannot stand for Labour. In light of all this, I would love to see her run as an independent and keep the damn seat. I'm sure she would. It's another one of those instances where Starmer appears to be abusing his position to remove his critics, because he can't handle criticism. This really is as low as you go, and yet remains completely believable about someone like Keir Starmer. Diane Abbott asked for his support. He's weaponised it for fundraising and for cheap attacks on the Tories when his own party, his own faction within it, have been part of the problem. A Labour member should expect support from their party leader, but it's not there. More on this story with this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.